It is pretty crazy that instead of needing to carry around a big, heavy camera, our smartphones have gotten good enough that we can capture documentation shots or even 4K video through scopes and binoculars. If you're new here, I'm Doug Hitchcock. My goal is to get the most people to see the most birds, and in this video, I'm going to cover the how-tos of digiscoping with a smartphone, and we'll look at what hardware and software you should use to get the best shots possible. Let's start with the basics. What is digiscoping? The word is basically a portmanteau of digi for digital camera and scoping referring to a spotting scope. We also get the less common digibinning, with bins referring to binoculars. The more technical term for this method of photography that uses a camera lined up or mounted to another image-forming system is called afocal photography, but I've honestly never heard birders call it that, so for the purpose of this video, we'll stick with digiscoping. I'll also acknowledge afocal photography has been around for a long time. It was basically how John William Draper took the first photo, technically a daguerreotype, of the moon in 1840. But again, for this video, we'll focus on the modern digital photography and how it has improved in the last few decades. I do want to give credit where due, as Lawrence Poe, a Malaysian birder and photographer, is often cited as the inventor of digiscoping. The origin story being that in February 1999, Lawrence spotted a raptor perched in a distant tree that he couldn't identify. So wanting to capture a photo of it, he held his recently purchased Olympus C900 digital camera up to his Leica scope, and history was made. It is a bit funny in 2025, with the prevalence of cameras and our comfort with them, that digiscoping is almost an intuitive thing to try. I've led bird walks with school groups where young kids just whip out their phones and start taking pictures through my scope. Having never heard of digiscoping before, it just comes naturally to them. But again, in 1999, it was a pretty novel concept, especially since most bird photographers were still shooting with film. Lawrence passed away in September 2004, but I'd recommend using the Wayback Machine to read some of the articles on his website, take a little trip back to those early days of digiscoping. With the what covered, now let's talk about the how. There are a few techniques and considerations we'll get into, but I want to start with some tips on how to take a quick handheld photo. Being able to quickly snap a documentation photo of a bird is a great skill to have, especially if you have found a rare species. As they say, a photo is worth 1,000 words, and I'll make a plug here for my what to do if you find a rare bird video for more tips on how to document rarities. So let's practice this. I think an important thing to keep in mind is that you're trying to line up a beam of light traveling through your scope or binoculars with the lens, or ultimately the sensor in your camera. Step 1 is to make sure your optics are focused on the subject. You may need to make some minor adjustments to the focus later, but you'll make the next steps a lot easier if you have the bird already in focus. Step 2 is probably the hardest part, which is lining up that beam of light with the sensor. I always recommend starting pretty far back and slowly moving the camera towards the eyepiece. You want to be able to see the light coming through the scope and slowly follow that in until you have enough of the image hitting the sensor to capture your subject. Step 3 is taking the photo. The funny thing that is often overlooked here is making sure you're holding your camera in a way that you can still take a photo. I like to place one hand on my scope's eyepiece to help make little micro adjustments needed to keep everything lined up, with my dominant hand controlling the camera. You might need to tap on your subject to get the focus or exposure right, so being able to reach around on the screen is important. Okay, that was a simple explanation for when everything goes perfectly, but there are a few factors that we should talk about. One important thing to keep in mind here is how small that beam of light is. That measurement is called the exit pupil of your optics, which is the diameter of the beam of light, and it's calculated by dividing the diameter of your objective lens, that's the piece of glass that's furthest from your eye, by the magnification. Because of this, if you are shooting through an eyepiece with a zoom, you'll probably want to start as wide as possible, at least at first. Another thing to be aware of is which lens you are using. Depending on your phone, you may have several to choose from, but you'll always get the best results from the main camera. This is typically going to be your highest quality sensor with the best low light performance. Before trying to digiscope, you may want to figure out which lens is connected to that main camera by either looking it up, or you can try covering up different lenses while taking a photo. One annoying feature you may have to deal with is your phone wanting to switch automatically to its macro lens because you are holding it so close to the eyepiece. Instead of focusing on the image coming through the scope, it'll attempt to focus on the glass that's right in front of it. On iPhones, the macro lens was added with the iPhone 13 Pro, and if you own one from since then, you'll want to go into your phone's camera settings and look for macro control. With that toggle on, you'll see the option to be able to turn macro off when you're using the camera app, which switches you back from the wide-angle lens used with the macro photos to the main lens you want for digiscoping. A lot of cameras are now getting telephoto lenses separate from the main lens. In most cases, your main lens is going to produce the highest quality image, but you should definitely be aware your camera may shift lenses when you're zooming in. I have to admit that digiscoping with a phone felt a lot easier when we only had one camera. This is another fun case of the paradox of progress that I talk about in my video on rare bird alerts, where over time as technologies make things better, it also makes them seem worse. That said, I thought it'd be fun to dust off some of my old phones and see how ease of use and quality have changed over time. The original iPhone from 2007 only had a 2 megapixel camera. I'm pretty impressed that this thing would even start up, and going through my camera roll from 18 years ago, it perhaps wasn't a surprise that I never even tried digiscoping with this. But here are some of the results from using it handheld with a Swarovski ATX scope with a 95mm objective, set at 30 times, its widest magnification. I also tried taking some shots through an older Swarovski ATS scope, which has an 80mm objective, and the eyepiece set to 25 times. Remember our exit pupil calculation from before, so the ATX has a 3.16mm exit pupil while the ATS has a 3.2mm. If I zoom the ATS up to 30, matching the ATX, our exit pupil is now around 2.6mm, and this becomes an even more challenging pairing. The iPhone 4S from 2011 was when we finally got a jump to 8 megapixels, which was at least a file size that you can start to zoom in or crop the photo, which is essentially the last step in digiscoping that I didn't mention before. You'll almost always need to clean up a little bit of vignetting in your photos, usually unless your sensor is completely covered by that tiny beam of light. Interestingly, I remember buying my first digital SLR, and the recommendation at the time was that for bird photography, you wanted at least 8 megapixels, and look at how far we've come. We can see a nice improvement with the jump to 12 megapixels in the iPhone X or 10. They switched to a 12 megapixel sensor with the 6S, but the 10 got an improved lens from f2.2 to f1.8, which sounds small but is going to allow a lot more light in. The other significant thing about 12 megapixel sensors being able to record 4K video, but we'll talk about that more in a little bit. It is kind of amazing how long Apple stayed with the 12 megapixel sensor, as it wouldn't be until the iPhone 14 Pro when a 48 megapixel camera was added. And this is where I'll say, if you're using an older phone, and well, older than the 14, and wondering if you should upgrade, this is where you'll see a massive improvement in photos from here on. The next thing we should talk about is how to make your Digiscope photos better. And one of the best things you can do is to remove the struggles from hand-holding your phone and use some type of mount. Before going into the various phone adapters, I wanted to mention that there are some almost endless options for mounting various cameras to spotting scopes. Probably one of the worst pieces of equipment I've ever bought was this UCA rig from Swarovski. UCA being short for Universal Camera Adapter. It was made for attaching a point-and-shoot or a DSLR to an ATS scope. I wanted to mention it here just to show how desperate we used to be to get a good mounting solution, and how much better things are now, especially since our phones are just as good as those cameras were. The first phone adapter I ever bought was this awesome case from Kawa, the TSN IP5. They had a few different cases depending on which phone you had, and then you screwed on an adapter ring for the exact size eyepiece you needed. And this is digiscoping at its best, or easiest, when you have the exact case and adapter needed, so you can quickly attach your phone to your scope and be shooting. Now, unfortunately, as soon as you need to change your phone, you're going to also need to buy a new case, and this can get surprisingly pricey. Another adapter I wanted to mention was the short-lived option from Swarovski that I bought for my iPhone 6S, the PAI6. Definitely one of the best designs, aesthetically, being a thin metal cage, small enough that with the adapter removed, you could leave it on your phone and not really notice it. Unfortunately, it had one major flaw that made it pretty obvious that the engineers making this thing never actually tried it themselves. Completely enclosing your phone in a metal cage keeps it from receiving a cellular signal. So this adapter is basically a Faraday cage and blocks all radio waves, so your phone would lose service as soon as it was put in the case. After that, I bought a universal adapter, which is definitely an economical choice if you're the kind of person who upgrades your phone with some frequency. Conceptually, you get to make all the adjustments to line it up exactly for your phone so it is ready to go when you need it. Unfortunately, the clips aren't that strong and the teeth are so small that it only takes a small push to ruin your otherwise perfect settings. The adapter rings on these are all fairly snug, so it makes it really easy to accidentally adjust this adapter when you're just trying to attach it to the eyepiece. The last thing I'll mention from a hardware standpoint is that you may want to use a remote to avoid vibrations when shooting at very high magnifications. This is easy if you use wired earbuds as a trigger, but you can even set a timer, which can help in a pinch. Before we move on to software, I thought it'd be fun to try the worst camera that I could find, and luckily I still have my Game Boy camera from 1998, predating Lawrence Poe's first digiscoping attempt. The sensor on this thing is only 128 by 128 pixels with a 4-color grayscale palette, so you can probably guess how well it worked. Let me know in the comments if you can identify this bird and what rating you would give this in the Macaulay library. In most cases, using the default camera app on your phone is going to be all you need for capturing an image or video of a bird, but there are a couple apps that add additional controls you may want to take advantage of. One thing that your default camera app doesn't give you is great control over precise focus. With bird photography, the goal is generally to have the focus point on the bird's eye, and sometimes no matter how much you try to tap on that specific spot, your phone just won't grab the point that you want. This is where an app like Blackmagic Cam is helpful because you have access to more controls. I'll acknowledge this is the kind of app that a professional videographer is more likely to be using, so it may be a bit much for what most birders need, but learning these controls will help give you some amazing results. You can turn off the autofocus and use a slider to lock it exactly where you want it. And this will also be a good time to mention that when digiscoping, other lenses and sensors get covered, which can throw off settings like white balance. That can usually be corrected after the recording, but this app gives you good controls to fix that so you can get the right recording from the start. For photos, the Lightroom app is also great and has many of the same controls just mentioned. These apps will also give direct control over which lens you are using, which helps solve the problem we discussed earlier of your camera jumping between lenses. The last thing I want to mention is that smartphones aren't exactly taking photos the way that we think most cameras are working. In order to get ideal photos of people and landscapes, our smartphones are blending exposures, adding sharpening, and making adjustments to produce what is sometimes a better image than what was actually there. And you might not want that if you're trying to capture a bird or this natural history moment. There are apps now like Halide that have a process 0 setting, allowing you to take a photo without any of the built-in processing applied. The interesting thing is that some smartphone manufacturers are starting to build their cameras with imperfections because it helps with things like light gathering, and then they are using software to then correct for those imperfections. So beware that you may end up with unintended results either way. If there's one last bit of advice I can leave you with, it is to practice. Finding that sweet spot of exactly where to hold your gear will take time, and eventually you will develop some muscle memory. I hope you found this video helpful, and as always, you can help me with my goal of getting the most people to see the most birds by liking this video and making sure you're subscribed. Thank you.